England, 1847. The glittering chandeliers of Fairfax House cast a golden glow over the annual spring ball, where the cream of London society gathered in their finest attire. Ladies in silk gowns swept across polished floors, their laughter tinkling like delicate bells against the steady hum of orchestral music. For most, it was an evening of celebration and revelry. For Miss Amelia Goderic, it was to be the beginning of her descent into humiliation. Amelia stood by the refreshment table, absently toying with the lace trim of her pale blue gown. At 22, she possessed a quiet beauty, not the kind that commanded immediate attention, but the sort that revealed itself slowly, like a flower unfurling in the morning light. Her chestnut hair was arranged in an elegant coiffure, accentuating her slender neck and the gentle curve of her shoulders. "You seem rather pensive this evening, Miss Goderic," observed Lady Harrington, an elderly matron whose sharp eyes missed nothing. "One would expect more enthusiasm from a bride-to-be." Amelia offered a practiced smile. "Forgive me, Lady Harrington. I find myself a trifle overwhelmed by the grandeur of the occasion." "Humph. Well, you'd best accustom yourself to such affairs. As the future Countess Fairfax, you'll be expected to host gatherings twice as lavish." The reminder of her impending marriage to Edmund Fairfax settled like a stone in Amelia's stomach. Their engagement had been arranged years ago, a mutually beneficial arrangement between her father, a respected but financially strained merchant, and the ambitious Fairfax family. Edmund needed a wife of good breeding to enhance his social standing. Amelia's family needed the security of a noble connection. Love had never entered the equation. "Speaking of your betrothed," Lady Harrington continued, her gaze drifting across the ballroom, "I haven't seen him for quite some time, nor your dear friend Miss Ashworth for that matter." Amelia glanced around the crowded room. Indeed, both Edmund and Viola were conspicuously absent. "Perhaps they've stepped out for some air," she suggested. "The ballroom has grown rather warm." Lady Harrington's lips pursed. "Together? How peculiar." She patted Amelia's arm with unexpected gentleness. "My dear, I've lived long enough to recognize when something is amiss. The way your fiancé looks at Miss Ashworth is not how a gentleman should regard his betrothed's closest friend." Heat rose to Amelia's cheeks. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." "Don't you?" The elderly woman sighed. "You're a clever girl, Miss Goderic, too clever to be made a fool." With those cryptic words, Lady Harrington drifted away, leaving Amelia with a growing sense of unease. She had noticed Edmund's attentiveness to Viola over the past months, but had dismissed her concerns as mere jealousy. Viola Ashworth had been her dearest friend since childhood, beautiful, vivacious, and born into wealth that Amelia's family could only dream of. Surely she would never betray such a long-standing friendship. Yet doubt, once planted, grew like ivy, twisting around her thoughts. Amelia made her way through the crowd, nodding politely to acquaintances as she searched for either Edmund or Viola. She found neither in the ballroom nor the adjacent card-room. A footman informed her that no one had ventured onto the terrace. That left only the library and the conservatory on the ground floor. The library door was ajar, a sliver of light spilling onto the carpeted hallway. As Amelia approached, she heard voices, hushed, intimate, unmistakable. "Edmund, we cannot continue like this." Viola's voice, usually so confident, trembled with emotion. "It isn't fair to Amelia. Since when has fairness been a consideration in matters of marriage?" Edmund's tone was dismissive. "My engagement to Amelia is a business arrangement, nothing more. Her father's connections will help secure my position with the East India Company, and in return, her family gains the prestige of a title." "And what of love?" Viola asked. There was a pause, followed by the rustle of fabric. "Love is for poets and fools, my dear. But if you insist on such sentiments, then know that you alone hold my heart." Amelia stood frozen, each word a dagger to her chest. She had never harbored romantic illusions about her engagement, but to hear Edmund speak so coldly of their union, and to her dearest friend no less, was a cruelty she had not anticipated. She should have turned away then, preserved what little dignity remained. Instead, propelled by a need to confront the betrayal face to face, she pushed the door open. The scene before her confirmed her worst fears. Edmund stood with Viola in his embrace, their faces inches apart, his hand inappropriately placed at her waist. They sprang apart at Amelia's entrance, but the damage was done. "Amelia!" Viola gasped, her face pale with shock. "This isn't... We were just... Don't!" Amelia whispered, her voice surprisingly steady, despite the tempest raging within. "Please don't insult me with excuses." Edmund straightened his waistcoat, his handsome features settling into a mask of aristocratic indifference. "You're making a scene over nothing, Amelia. Viola was upset, and I was merely offering comfort." "Comfort?" Amelia echoed, incredulity breaking through her shock. "Is that what you call it?" "I heard everything, Edmund. Your dismissal of our engagement as a mere business transaction, your declaration of feelings for Viola." A flicker of annoyance crossed Edmund's face. "Don't be theatrical. Marriage among our class has always been about advantage, not sentiment. I thought you understood that." "I understood that we had an arrangement," Amelia replied, her hands trembling slightly. "What I did not agree to was humiliation." Viola stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Amelia, please. It was never my intention to hurt you. It just happened." The betrayal cut deeper coming from Viola than from Edmund. They had shared secrets, dreams, fears, all while Viola had been nurturing feelings for Amelia's betrothed. "How long?" Amelia asked quietly. Viola and Edmund exchanged glances. "How long have you been deceiving me?" Amelia pressed, her voice rising despite her best efforts to maintain composure. 6 months, Edmund admitted callously, though Viola has held my affections for much longer. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of pretense, of Viola listening to Amelia's concerns about her impending marriage while secretly meeting her fiancé. The realization was too much to bear. Amelia turned to leave, desperate for air, for escape from the suffocating betrayal. "Amelia, wait," Viola called after her. "Let me explain." But Amelia was already moving, pushing past curious onlookers who had begun to gather in the hallway, drawn by the raised voices. She was dimly aware of whispers, of eyes following her flight, but pride kept her spine straight and her chin high as she made her way through the ballroom. Only when she reached the relative sanctuary of the garden did she allow her composure to crack. The night air was cool against her flushed skin, the scent of roses offering little comfort as she struggled to breathe through the tightness in her chest. She had lost not only her fiancé, but also her dearest friend in one devastating moment. Worse, by morning, the scandal would be on every tongue in London. The humiliated Miss Godrich cast aside for her more beautiful, more wealthy friend. "Are you unwell, Miss Godrich?" The deep voice startled Amelia from her thoughts. She turned to find George Cavendish, the Duke of Ashford, regarding her with concern. Tall and imposing in his immaculate evening attire, the Duke was a commanding presence even in the dim light of the garden lanterns. "Your Grace," she managed, hastily wiping away a tear. "Forgive me, I didn't realize anyone else was here." "No apology needed," he replied, his voice gentler than his reputation would suggest. "These affairs can become overwhelming. I often find myself seeking refuge in gardens as well." Amelia had seen the Duke at various social functions, but had never spoken to him directly. Few did. At 32, George Cavendish was one of England's wealthiest and most powerful men, and its most elusive bachelors. Rumours about him abounded, that he had built his fortune through cunning investments after inheriting a near-bankrupt dukedom, that he scorned society despite his position within it, that he had sworn never to marry after some mysterious heartbreak in his youth. Whatever the truth, his presence in the garden now was most unexpected. "It's more than mere social fatigue, I think," he observed, studying her face. "You seem genuinely distressed." Something in his direct gaze, free from the usual society artifice, broke through Amelia's remaining defenses. "I've just discovered that my fiancé and my dearest friend have been involved. For months," she admitted, the words spilling out before she could reconsider confiding in a near stranger. "And now I've fled the scene like a coward." To her surprise, the Duke didn't offer empty platitudes or awkward sympathy. Instead, he said, "The true cowardice lies with them, Miss Godrich. Betrayal masked as propriety is the refuge of the weak." His unexpected understanding loosened something tight within her chest. "Nevertheless, I shall be the one bearing the brunt of the scandal. By tomorrow, everyone will know that Edmund Fairfax has all but jilted me for Viola Ashworth." The Duke was silent for a moment, his expression thoughtful as he gazed over the moonlit garden. "Scandal can be redirected," he said finally. "Society's memory is short, and its attention easily diverted by a more compelling narrative. What narrative could possibly overshadow this humiliation? Amelia asked bitterly. A curious light entered the Duke's eyes. What if instead of the abandoned fiancé, you became the woman who caught the interest of a duke? Amelia stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. Your Grace, I propose an arrangement, Miss Goderich, he said, his voice low and deliberate. Allow me to escort you back into that ballroom, where I shall make it clear to all present that I find your company preferable to any other. The gossips will quickly forget about Fairfax's indiscretion in favor of speculating about the Duke of Ashford's sudden interest in you. Amelia's mind raced. But why would you do such a thing? You hardly know me. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Let's just say I have little patience for men who don't honor their commitments. He extended his hand. What say you, Miss Goderich? Shall we give the ton something worthwhile to discuss? Perhaps it was madness, or perhaps it was the strange calm that follows devastating revelation, but Amelia found herself placing her gloved hand in his. Yes, she said simply. I believe we shall. As the Duke of Ashford led her back toward the brightly lit ballroom, Amelia felt the first stirrings of something unexpected beneath her grief and humiliation, a flicker of defiance, a spark of hope, and the curious sensation that her life had somehow veered onto an entirely different path in the span of a single evening. The return to Fairfax House's ballroom on the arm of the Duke of Ashford created precisely the sensation George Cavendish had predicted. Conversations faltered, music seemed to dim, and all eyes turned to the unlikely pair as they entered through the terrace doors. Amelia felt the weight of those stares, some curious, others envious, a few openly hostile. She caught sight of her parents across the room, her mother's expression a mixture of confusion and alarm, her father appearing similarly bewildered. Nearby stood Edmund and Viola, who had evidently emerged from their hiding place in the library. Edmund's face darkened with suspicion, while Viola's complexion had gone deathly pale. Courage, Miss Goderich, the Duke murmured, his hand steady beneath hers. In my experience, society respects nothing so much as confidence, whether genuine or feigned. Taking a deep breath, Amelia straightened her shoulders and affected an expression of serene composure. The Duke led her directly to the center of the ballroom, where he signaled to the orchestra. The musicians, recognizing the gesture of one of England's most powerful noblemen, brought their current piece to a close. In the ensuing silence, the Duke of Ashford addressed the startled gathering. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you'll forgive the interruption to this splendid evening. His voice carried effortlessly across the room, commanding attention without apparent effort. I find myself compelled to share some unexpected but welcome news. A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd. The Duke continued, his gaze unwavering. It seems I have found myself utterly captivated this evening. Miss Amelia Goderich has granted me the honor of her attention, and I find I cannot bear to waste another moment before making my intentions clear. Gasps echoed around the ballroom. From the corner of her eye, Amelia saw Edmund take a step forward, his expression thunderous, before Lord Fairfax placed a restraining hand on his son's arm. Miss Goderich, the Duke continued, turning to face her directly, would you do me the great honor of permitting me to call upon you tomorrow? I believe we have much to discuss regarding our future acquaintance. It was not a proposal of marriage. That would have been too precipitous even for this dramatic rescue, but it was a clear declaration of interest from a man who had never before shown particular attention to any woman in society. The implication was unmistakable. Amelia felt a curious calm settle over her. This charade, if indeed it was such, offered her an escape from humiliation. More than that, it provided a way to reclaim some measure of dignity from the evening's earlier devastation. You honor me with your interest, Your Grace, she replied, her voice steady despite the thundering of her heart. I would be delighted to receive you. A smattering of applause broke out, quickly muted by the shock still rippling through the assembly. The Duke signaled to the orchestra once more, and as the musicians struck up a waltz, he drew Amelia into his arms. Well played, he murmured as they began to move across the floor. You have a remarkable capacity for composure under duress. Necessity is a stern teacher, Your Grace, she replied quietly. For a man who reportedly avoided society whenever possible, the Duke of Ashford proved to be an accomplished dancer. He guided Amelia with effortless grace, maintaining a proper distance while still creating the impression of intimacy. I should warn you, he said, that while this evening's display will certainly divert attention from your former fiancé's indiscretion, it will place you squarely in society's scrutiny. Are you prepared for that? Amelia considered his words carefully. I believe that being the object of speculation regarding the Duke of Ashford's interest is preferable to being pitied as the woman scorned by Edmund Fairfax. A flicker of genuine amusement crossed his features. Well reasoned. Though I must point out that our little performance this evening has created certain expectations. To maintain credibility, we must continue the charade for at least a short while. How short? Amelia asked, suddenly aware of the implications of their impromptu scheme. Long enough to convince society that your broken engagement to Fairfax is of no consequence to you, he replied pragmatically. A few weeks, perhaps a month, after which time we can orchestrate a natural and amicable parting of ways, with your reputation not only intact but enhanced by having captured, however briefly, the interest of a duke. It was a coldly logical proposition, yet Amelia sensed something beneath the duke's detached manner, a hint of genuine concern, perhaps, or some personal motivation he had not yet revealed. "And what do you gain from this arrangement, Your Grace?" she asked directly. His eyes, a striking shade of grey that reminded Amelia of storm clouds, assessed her with new interest. "Perceptive," he noted. "Very well. In truth, Miss Goderic, I find myself in need of a temporary shield against the matchmaking mammas of the ton. An apparent interest in you will discourage their efforts to parade their daughters before me this season." "So we use each other," Amelia summarized, finding the honesty of his admission oddly refreshing. "A mutually beneficial arrangement," he corrected, with clearly defined parameters and a predetermined conclusion. The waltz was drawing to a close. Soon they would be separated by the social obligations of the evening, she to explain this startling development to her parents, he to maintain the appearance of a man newly smitten. "I accept your terms, Your Grace," Amelia decided, "though I confess I find it strange to enter into another arrangement so soon after discovering the hollowness of my previous one." The music ended, and the Duke stepped back, bowing formally over her hand. "The difference, Miss Goderic," he said quietly, "is that we begin with honesty between us, no false promises, no hidden agendas." As he straightened, Amelia was struck by the intensity of his gaze. For a moment, she glimpsed something behind his carefully maintained facade, a depth of feeling, perhaps even a vulnerability, at odds with his reputation as London's most aloof aristocrat. The moment passed quickly. With a slight smile that did not quite reach his eyes, the Duke said more loudly for the benefit of those nearby, "Until tomorrow, Miss Goderic. I shall call upon you at 2:00. He departed with a final bow, leaving Amelia to face the immediate consequences of their scheme. She had barely taken 3 steps when her mother appeared at her side, clutching her arm with barely concealed agitation. "Amelia, what in heaven's name has transpired?" Mrs. Goderic hissed, steering her daughter toward a relatively quiet corner. "First rumours of some scene with Edmund and Viola, and now the Duke of Ashford is singling you out. Have you taken leave of your senses?" "Not at all, Mother," Amelia replied, summoning what remained of her composure. "I've merely discovered that one arrangement was false while another opportunity presented itself." Her father joined them, his expression torn between concern and a certain calculating interest. "The Duke is worth 10 of young Fairfax in terms of position and fortune," he observed, "but his interest seems sudden." "Sometimes," Amelia said, thinking of the betrayal she had witnessed in the library, "revelations occur quite suddenly." Before her parents could press further, a commotion near the entrance to the ballroom drew their attention. Edmund was striding toward them, his face flushed with anger, Viola trailing behind him with visible distress. "What game are you playing at, Amelia?" Edmund demanded, his voice low but sharp. "One moment you're my fiancé, the next you're making a spectacle of yourself with Ashford." "A spectacle?" Amelia echoed, a new strength in her voice. "How interesting that you would choose that particular word, Edmund. I might apply it to a man conducting a clandestine affair with his betrothed's closest friend." Edmund blanched, glancing nervously at the onlookers gathering nearby. "Lower your voice," he hissed. "Whatever you think you saw or heard was perfectly clear," Amelia interrupted, "as was your assessment of our engagement as a mere business arrangement. I'm simply following your example by pursuing a more advantageous connection." Viola stepped forward, tears glistening in her eyes. "Amelia, please, we never meant to hurt you. It just happened." "Twice now you've said that, Viola," Amelia observed coldly. "Yet I find myself unable to believe that 6 months of deception just happened." Edmund's expression hardened. "You forget yourself, Amelia. Our engagement has not been formally dissolved. Your behavior with Ashford borders on scandalous." "No more scandalous than your behavior with Miss Ashworth," interjected a deep voice from behind Amelia. The Duke of Ashford had returned, his timing impeccable. He positioned himself at Amelia's side, a silent but unmistakable declaration of support. "This is a private matter, Ashford," Edmund said stiffly. "It doesn't concern you." "On the contrary," the Duke replied, his tone deceptively mild. "Miss Goderic's well-being has become a matter of great personal interest to me, and from what I observe, your presence is causing her distress." Edmund's face darkened further. "You've no right to interfere in matters between me and my fiancé." "Former fiancé," Amelia corrected firmly. "I cannot, will not, marry a man who has betrayed my trust so completely." A tense silence followed her declaration. It was Mrs. Goderich who finally broke it, her social instincts overriding her shock. "I believe this discussion would be better continued in private," she said, glancing meaningfully at the circle of interested observers that had formed around them. "Lord Fairfax's study, perhaps." "An excellent suggestion," the Duke agreed smoothly. "Though I must insist on accompanying Miss Goderich if she wishes it." Amelia nodded gratefully. "I would appreciate your presence, Your Grace." The small party made their way to Lord Fairfax's study, where Edmund's father was already waiting, his expression grave. As the door closed behind them, shutting out the curious eyes and ears of the ball attendees, Amelia steeled herself for the confrontation to come. Lord Fairfax spoke first, addressing Amelia with cold formality. "Miss Goderich, I understand you've made certain accusations regarding my son's conduct." "Not accusations, my lord," Amelia replied steadily. "I witnessed Edmund and Miss Ashworth in an intimate embrace and overheard their conversation. They admitted to having conducted a secret relationship for the past 6 months, all while I remained ignorant of their betrayal." Edmund stepped forward, his manner shifting from anger to persuasion. "Amelia, you're overreacting. Yes, Viola and I have developed an attachment, but these things happen. Our engagement can still proceed as planned. Nothing need change." "Nothing need change?" Amelia repeated incredulously. "You expect me to marry you, knowing that your heart belongs to another, to my dearest friend, no less." "Marriage among our class is rarely about affection," Edmund replied dismissively. "You've always known that. Our family's arrangements stand to benefit us both. As my wife, you would want for nothing material, except dignity," the Duke of Ashford observed dryly, "and respect. Rather significant omissions. Wouldn't you agree, Fairfax?" Edmund's jaw tightened. "Again, Ashford, this matter doesn't concern you." "It concerns me greatly," the Duke countered, "as I intend to court Miss Goderich openly, provided she is free to receive my attentions." The statement hung in the air, its implications clear. If the Fairfax family insisted on maintaining the engagement, despite Edmund's indiscretion, they would risk direct opposition from one of England's most influential peers. Lord Fairfax, a shrewd man who had built his family's fortune through careful political maneuvering, recognized the implied threat immediately. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "given these unfortunate circumstances, a dissolution of the engagement would indeed be best for all concerned." Edmund turned to his father in disbelief. "Father, the Goderich connection is vital for our interests in the East India Company, as is remaining in the good graces of the Duke of Ashford," Lord Fairfax cut in meaningfully. "Sometimes, Edmund, one must recognize when a hand is lost and fold gracefully." Viola, who had remained silent since entering the study, suddenly spoke. "Edmund, please, this has gone too far. We've hurt Amelia deeply. The least we can do is release her from an engagement neither of us has honored in spirit." Edmund looked from his father to Viola, then finally to Amelia. Something in his expression shifted, pride giving way to a grudging recognition of defeat. "Very well," he said stiffly. "Consider our engagement terminated, Amelia. I wish you joy of your Duke." The words were spoken with a bitterness that belied any genuine goodwill. "The settlements, Mr." Goderic began, his merchant's mind turning to practical matters. "The dowry will be returned in full," Lord Fairfax stated firmly, "along with a suitable settlement for Miss Goderic in recognition of the unfortunate nature of these circumstances." Amelia's father nodded, a hint of relief crossing his features. The Goderic family had stretched their resources to provide Amelia's dowry. Its loss would have been financially devastating. "Then it appears our business is concluded," the Duke of Ashford observed. "Miss Goderic, might I suggest we return to the ballroom? I believe you promised me another dance." Amelia recognized the offer for what it was, a chance to depart with dignity, to show society that she emerged from this confrontation, not as a victim but as a woman with promising prospects. "Indeed, Your Grace," she replied, accepting his proffered arm. "I believe I did." As they moved toward the door, Viola stepped forward one last time. "Amelia," she said hesitantly, "I know I have no right to ask, but is there any possibility that someday you might forgive?" "No," Amelia interrupted, her voice quiet but firm. "Some betrayals cut too deeply for forgiveness, Viola. You were more sister than friend to me. That makes your deception all the more painful." Tears spilled down Viola's cheeks. "I understand," she whispered. "But I want you to know that I am truly sorry." Amelia studied the face of the woman who had been her closest companion since childhood. Despite everything, part of her ached at the finality of this rupture. But stronger than that ache was the certainty that some bonds once broken could never be mended. "Goodbye, Viola," she said simply, before turning away. As the Duke of Ashford escorted her back to the ballroom, Amelia felt strangely light-headed, not with grief or anger, but with an unexpected sense of liberation. The life she had resigned herself to, the future she had accepted out of duty, had been shattered. In its place lay uncertainty, but also possibility. "You handled that admirably," the Duke commented as they neared the ballroom entrance. "Few would have maintained such composure." "I've had years of practice in concealing my true feelings," Amelia replied. "A necessary skill for a woman in my position." The Duke regarded her thoughtfully. "Perhaps in our arrangement you might find opportunities to speak your mind more freely. I've little patience for dissembling, Miss Goderic, even in service of propriety." The orchestra was playing another waltz as they re-entered the ballroom. Without hesitation, the Duke led Amelia onto the dance floor, drawing her into his arms with practiced ease. "People are watching," Amelia murmured, acutely aware of the curious gazes following their every move. "Let them," he replied. "By morning, the dissolution of your engagement to Fairfax will be common knowledge. Better they also witness your apparent contentment with the change in circumstances." As they moved across the floor, Amelia studied her unexpected champion more closely. The Duke of Ashford's reputation painted him as cold, calculating and utterly devoted to business rather than pleasure. Yet his actions this evening suggested a capacity for kindness, or at least justice, that contradicted that portrayal. "May I ask you something, Your Grace?" she ventured. "George," he corrected quietly. "If we are to convince society of our attachment, you should use my given name, at least in private." "George, then," Amelia said, the familiarity feeling strange on her tongue. "Why did you intervene tonight? Truly." The Duke's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his grey eyes. "Let's just say I recognize the particular cruelty of discovering someone is not who you believe them to be." There was a story there, Amelia sensed, perhaps the explanation for his notorious avoidance of romantic entanglements. But before she could inquire further, the music ended, and the moment passed. As the evening drew to a close, George escorted Amelia and her parents to their carriage. To maintain the appearance of their burgeoning attachment, he pressed a lingering kiss to her gloved hand before assisting her into the vehicle. "Until tomorrow, Amelia," he said, just loudly enough for nearby departing guests to overhear. "I shall count the hours." Only when the carriage door closed, shielding her from public view, did Amelia allow her carefully maintained facade to slip. Exhaustion swept over her, along with the delayed shock of the evening's events. Her engagement was broken, her closest friendship shattered, and she had somehow entered into a new arrangement with the most enigmatic man in London society. Her mother leaned forward, eyes wide with anxious excitement. "Amelia, you must tell us everything. How on earth did you capture the attention of the Duke of Ashford? And what precisely occurred with Edmund and Viola?" Amelia sighed. gathering her strength for the necessary explanations. "It's rather a long story, Mother, and I'm afraid parts of it are not particularly flattering to anyone involved." As the carriage rolled through London's darkened streets, Amelia recounted the evening's events, omitting only the pragmatic nature of her arrangement with the Duke. Let her parents believe for now that his interest was genuine. The truth was complicated enough without adding that particular revelation. By the time they reached their Mayfair townhouse, modest compared to their neighbours' grander residences, Amelia's parents had processed enough of the shocking developments to begin considering their practical implications. "The Duke's interest changes everything," her father observed, helping Amelia alight from the carriage. "Even if it leads nowhere, the connection alone will elevate our standing considerably." "Henry," Mrs. Godrich chided, "our daughter has experienced a significant upheaval this evening. Perhaps discussions of social advantage can wait until morning." Mr. Godrich had the grace to look abashed. "Of course, my dear. Forgive me, Amelia. Your mother is quite right. You should rest." Amelia kissed her father's cheek, grateful for his concern despite his mercantile instincts. "It's quite all right, Father. We shall discuss everything tomorrow after the Duke's visit." In her bedchamber, as her lady's maid helped her prepare for bed, Amelia caught sight of her reflection in the mirror. She looked different somehow, her eyes brighter, her expression more alert, as though the evening's tumultuous events had awakened something long dormant within her. For years, she had accepted her place in society's careful arrangement, had resigned herself to a marriage based on convenience rather than affection. Now, unexpectedly, she found herself free of those constraints, if only temporarily. The Duke of Ashford, George, had made it clear that their arrangement was finite, a mutual convenience that would conclude once its purpose was served. Yet as Amelia slipped beneath her bed covers, she couldn't help wondering about the man behind the austere ducal facade. What had shaped him into the solitary figure society both respected and feared? What had he meant by recognizing the particular cruelty of discovering someone is not who you believed them to be? Tomorrow, when he called, perhaps she would begin to unravel the mystery of George Cavendish, Duke of Ashford. For tonight, exhaustion claimed her, drawing her into a dreamless sleep unmarked by the tears she might have expected after such a day of betrayal and revelation. The Duke of Ashford's carriage arrived at precisely 2 o'clock the following afternoon, its polished exterior and perfectly matched greys drawing appreciative glances from passers-by. Amelia, dressed in a gown of dove grey silk that her mother had insisted befitted her new status as the object of a duke's attention, waited in the drawing-room with studied calm that belied her inner turmoil. News of her broken engagement to Edmund Fairfax and the Duke's unexpected interest had spread through London society like wildfire. 3 morning callers had already visited the Godrich residence, ostensibly to inquire after Amelia's health, but transparently eager for details of the previous night's dramatic events. "His Grace, the Duke of Ashford," announced the butler, his voice carrying a note of suppressed excitement rare for the normally impassive servant. George Cavendish entered the drawing-room with the confident ease of a man accustomed to commanding attention in any setting. Dressed in a perfectly tailored dark blue coat and buff-coloured trousers, he cut an imposing figure against the modest furnishings of the Godrich home. "Miss Godrich," he greeted her, bowing formally before turning to acknowledge her parents. "Mr. Godrich, Mrs. Godrich, I trust I find you well this afternoon?" "Exceedingly well, Your Grace," Mrs. Godrich replied, practically glowing with maternal pride. "We're honoured by your visit." "The honour is mine," the Duke replied smoothly. "I've been looking forward to furthering my acquaintance with your daughter." Mr. Godrich cleared his throat. "Perhaps you would like to take refreshment in the garden, Your Grace? The weather is particularly fine today, and our roses are in full bloom." Amelia recognized her father's suggestion for what it was, an opportunity for her to converse more privately with the Duke, while still remaining within the bounds of propriety under her parents' distant supervision. "An excellent suggestion," George agreed. "Miss Godrich, would you do me the honour?" Amelia accepted his proffered arm, acutely aware of her mother's beaming approval as they made their way through the French doors leading to the modest but well-tended garden behind the Godrich townhouse. The afternoon sun cast dappled shadows across the gravel path as they strolled between neatly trimmed hedges and carefully cultivated roses. A stone bench situated beneath an ancient oak tree offered a modicum of privacy, while remaining visible from the drawing-room windows, the perfect balance of propriety and discretion. "You've caused quite a stir in society, Your Grace," Amelia observed once they were seated. "Lady Winslow and Mrs. Hemington both called this morning, fairly bursting with curiosity about your sudden interest in me." A faint smile touched the Duke's lips. "And what did you tell them?" "That some connections form unexpectedly, when one least anticipates them," she replied, vague enough to fuel speculation without committing to falsehoods. "Well done," he approved. "The best deceptions contain elements of truth." Amelia studied him in the clear afternoon light. Away from the artificial glow of ballroom chandeliers, the Duke of Ashford appeared somehow more human, still imposing certainly, but with subtle nuances to his expression that she hadn't noticed before. Tiny lines at the corners of his eyes suggested he smiled more often in private than his public persona indicated. "I've been thinking about our arrangement," she said carefully. "While I appreciate your intervention last night, truly I do, I wonder if we've embarked on a charade that may prove difficult to maintain." "Having second thoughts, Miss Godric?" he inquired, his tone neutral. "Not second thoughts precisely," Amelia clarified. "Rather practical considerations. London society will expect certain progression in our relationship. Eventually, they will anticipate an engagement announcement. And when none is forthcoming, they will assume I've trifled with your affections," the Duke concluded, "thereby creating a new scandal to replace the one we sought to avoid." Amelia nodded. "Unless we orchestrate our parting very carefully." "We needn't concern ourselves with that just yet," George said. "For now it's enough that society believes my interest genuine and your affections cautiously receptive. A fortnight of such appearances should suffice to establish that narrative firmly enough that when our paths eventually diverge, it will be seen as a natural conclusion rather than a rejection." Amelia accepted his assessment, though she remained unconvinced that the matter would resolve so neatly. Society rarely allowed its most eligible duke to conduct his affairs without intense scrutiny. "Now," George continued, his manner shifting subtly, "since we find ourselves temporarily aligned, I believe we should use this opportunity to become better acquainted. Our performance will be more convincing if built upon genuine understanding." "What would you like to know?" Amelia asked. "Everything that makes you who you are," he replied, surprising her with his directness. "Your interests, your dreams, your disappointments. The person behind the carefully composed society mask." Amelia hesitated, unaccustomed to such forthrightness. "That's rather a lot to divulge to someone who was a stranger until yesterday evening." "Fair enough," George acknowledged. "Perhaps I should begin then. You may ask me anything you wish, and I shall answer truthfully." The offer was unexpected and intriguing. What did one ask a duke when granted such liberty? Amelia considered carefully before speaking. "Last night, you mentioned recognizing the particular cruelty of discovering someone is not who you believed them to be. What did you mean by that?" If the Duke was surprised by her choice of question, he didn't show it. Instead, he gazed thoughtfully at the garden, as though seeing something beyond the carefully tended roses. "When I was 23, he began, I was engaged to Lady Caroline Wexford, daughter of the Earl of Harrington. It was an advantageous match. Her family possessed old blood and excellent connections, while mine, despite the dukedom, had fallen into financial disarray under my father's management." Amelia listened, fascinated by this glimpse into his past. Few knew much about the Duke of Ashford's personal history beyond public records and society gossip. "Unlike your arrangement with Fairfax, I believed myself genuinely in love," George continued, a hint of self-deprecation in his tone. "Caroline was beautiful, charming, and appeared to return my affections with equal fervor. I was young enough to believe that I had achieved that rarest of outcomes in aristocratic marriages, a union of both advantage and affection." "What happened?" Amelia asked gently, sensing the direction of the story. "A week before our wedding, I discovered letters she had written to Baron Westmoreland, intimate letters that made it clear their relationship extended far beyond proper acquaintance." His expression remained impassive, but Amelia detected the lingering echo of an old pain beneath his composed exterior. When confronted, Caroline admitted that she had never loved me. She had accepted my proposal solely on her father's insistence, due to the financial difficulties the Harrington estate was experiencing. "I'm sorry," Amelia said softly. George shook his head. "The discovery was painful, but ultimately valuable. It taught me to look beyond appearances, to question motives, and to recognize that in our social sphere, genuine feeling is often sacrificed at the altar of advantage. And so you've avoided romantic entanglement since then, Amelia concluded, the pieces of his reputation falling into place. I've avoided the pretense of romance, he corrected. Better honest solitude than false companionship, wouldn't you agree? The question seemed to invite a deeper confidence, and Amelia found herself responding with unexpected candor. I've never expected love in marriage, she admitted. My parents' union was arranged, as was my engagement to Edmund. I was raised to view marriage as a practical alliance rather than a romantic endeavor. She paused, searching for the right words. But I did expect loyalty, mutual respect. To discover that even those modest expectations were too much to hope for was illuminating. And disillusioning, George added perceptively. Yes, Amelia agreed, though perhaps the disillusionment is valuable, as you said of your own experience. At least now I harbor no false hopes. The Duke studied her with an intensity that made Amelia conscious of every detail of her appearance, the way the afternoon light caught in her hair, the slight flush that rose to her cheeks under his scrutiny. Tell me, he said, changing tack abruptly, if you were free of society's constraints, what would you choose for yourself? Not in terms of marriage, but life. What pursuits would occupy your time and mind? The question took Amelia by surprise. Few had ever asked about her personal desires beyond the conventional expectations for a woman of her station. I would travel, she answered after a moment's reflection. Not merely to the usual European destinations, but farther, to Constantinople perhaps, or even India. I've read accounts of such places that make our London society seem terribly small and provincial by comparison. An unusual ambition for a young lady, George observed, though his tone held no censure. I've always been drawn to knowledge, Amelia continued, emboldened by his apparent interest. My father indulged my educational inclinations more than most men of his generation might have. I read extensively, history, philosophy, even some scientific treatises, though I must admit much of the latter exceeds my understanding. And if you could choose your own path entirely, George pressed, would you marry at all? The directness of the question startled Amelia, but she found herself considering it seriously. I suppose I would wish for a partnership of minds as well as circumstances. Someone with whom I could converse freely, exchange ideas, perhaps even disagree without fear of censure. She smiled ruefully. A rather fanciful notion, I know. Not fanciful, George contradicted. Rare, perhaps, but not impossible. Something in his voice drew Amelia's gaze to his face. For a brief moment the ducal mask slipped, revealing a hint of the man beneath the title, thoughtful, perhaps even vulnerable in ways society never glimpsed. The moment was interrupted by the appearance of Mrs. Goderich at the drawing-room window, making a show of checking on their progress. I believe we're being summoned, George observed dryly. Your mother likely fears we've had insufficient time for meaningful conversation, yet too much for strict propriety. Amelia laughed, the sound spontaneous and genuine. You've assessed her perfectly. She's torn between wanting to advance our acquaintance and maintaining the appearance of proper supervision. They rose from the bench and began walking slowly back toward the house. I meant to ask, George said, whether Fairfax has made any further attempt to contact you since last night. Amelia shook her head. Not directly, though his mother sent a rather formal note this morning, expressing regret for the unfortunate misunderstanding and suggesting that cooler heads might prevail after reflection. A flicker of annoyance crossed the Duke's features. They still hope to salvage the arrangement then. Fairfax needs your father's connections for his eastern ventures. My father would never insist I honor the engagement now, Amelia assured him. He may be practical, but he's not heartless. Nevertheless, George said thoughtfully, it might be wise to emphasize our apparent attachment more publicly. Would you permit me to escort you to the Harringtons' musicale tomorrow evening? I understand it's to be quite the significant gathering. Amelia blinked in surprise. You wish to attend a musicale? I was given to understand you avoid such entertainments whenever possible. A hint of a smile touched his lips. My reputation for reclusiveness serves me well in business, but in this instance, visibility serves our purpose better. Besides, he added with unexpected lightness, I find my aversion to society lessened by the prospect of your company." The compliment, delivered with such apparent sincerity, brought a genuine blush to Amelia's cheeks. She reminded herself sternly that this was all part of their charade, the Duke playing his role with admirable conviction. "Then I shall be delighted to accompany you," she replied, matching his tone. As they re-entered the drawing room, where her parents waited with poorly disguised eagerness, Amelia found herself in the curious position of playing a role that felt increasingly less like pretense. The Duke of Ashford, George, had revealed himself to be far more complex and intriguing than his public persona suggested. Their arrangement might be temporary, a mutual convenience designed to navigate a social crisis, but Amelia couldn't help wondering what further revelations their pretended courtship might bring. The Harrington musical proved to be precisely the forum for public display that George had anticipated. As he escorted Amelia into the crowded music room, conversations faltered, heads turned, and speculative glances followed their progress. Lady Harrington herself, a formidable matron whose social influence was matched only by her talent for uncovering secrets, descended upon them immediately. "Your Grace!" she exclaimed, her voice carrying just enough to ensure neighboring guests could overhear. "What an unexpected pleasure! We so rarely have the honor of your presence at our humble gatherings." "I find my interests have expanded of late, Lady Harrington," George replied smoothly, his hand resting lightly at the small of Amelia's back. "Miss Goderic has been enlightening me on the virtues of musical appreciation." Lady Harrington's shrewd gaze swept over Amelia, assessing everything from the quality of her pale pink gown to the manner in which she stood beside the Duke. "Indeed," she murmured, "how fascinating that Miss Goderic has succeeded where so many others have failed." The observation, though couched as a compliment, carried a subtle barb that did not escape Amelia's notice. "Perhaps it's less a matter of success than of timing, Lady Harrington," Amelia replied with delicate emphasis. "Even the most resistant heart may find itself receptive under the right circumstances." George's hand pressed slightly more firmly against her back, a silent acknowledgement of her adroit response. Lady Harrington's eyebrows rose fractionally, before a calculating smile spread across her features. "How charmingly put, my dear. I do hope you'll both enjoy this evening's performance. We've secured Miss Evelyn Thompson for the principal recital, a remarkable young talent. But do excuse me, I see the Duchess of Marlborough has just arrived." As their hostess swept away, George guided Amelia toward seats near the front of the room, nodding acknowledgments to various acquaintances as they passed. "Well played," he murmured close to her ear. "You've given Lady Harrington precisely the fodder she needs to spread our narrative throughout London by breakfast tomorrow." "She's rather intimidating," Amelia confessed quietly. "I've always found her manner somewhat predatory." "An apt description," George agreed. "Lady Harrington feeds on information as others do on sustenance, but in this instance her appetite serves our purpose." They had just taken their seats when Amelia spotted Edmund and Viola entering the music room. Accompanied by Lord and Lady Fairfax, Edmund's gaze found hers immediately, his expression darkening as he noted her proximity to the Duke. "Your former fiancé appears less than pleased with our arrangement," George observed, following her line of sight. "He has no right to any opinion regarding my affairs," Amelia replied, though she couldn't entirely suppress a flutter of anxiety at the prospect of another confrontation. George's hand covered hers briefly. "You needn't concern yourself. Fairfax is many things, but he's not fool enough to create a scene in Lady Harrington's drawing room." The prediction proved accurate. Throughout the musical performance, a display of considerable talent by the young pianist, Edmund maintained a stony distance, though Amelia occasionally felt the weight of his gaze. Viola, by contrast, appeared pale and withdrawn, her usual vivacity dimmed by what Amelia could only assume was shame or regret. During the interval, as guests mingled and refreshments were served, George was briefly drawn into conversation with several gentlemen eager to discuss political matters. Amelia found herself momentarily alone, a situation quickly remedied by the appearance of Lady Charlotte Winters, one of the few society women whose company Amelia genuinely enjoyed. "My dear Amelia," Charlotte exclaimed, linking her arm through Amelia's. "You've been holding out on me. Not a word about the Duke of Ashford, and now you appear together as though it's the most natural thing in the world." Amelia smiled at her friend's characteristic directness. "It happened rather suddenly, Charlotte. I'm still becoming accustomed to it myself. Well, I for one am delighted, Charlotte declared. After that dreadful business with Edmund, and yes, everyone knows, my dear, these things always get out. You deserve someone of true worth and character. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. And between us, the Duke is a vast improvement in every regard. Fairfax always struck me as rather too pleased with himself. Amelia laughed despite herself. Charlotte, you're incorrigible. Merely observant, her friend countered with a grin, and what I observe is that the Duke looks at you in a way Fairfax never did, as though you're actually present, rather than merely decorative. Before Amelia could formulate a response to this unexpected assessment, she felt a presence at her side and turned to find Viola standing there, her expression a mixture of determination and apprehension. Amelia, Viola began hesitantly, might I speak with you privately? Charlotte's eyebrows rose, but she had sufficient tact to murmur, I'll just fetch us some champagne, before discreetly withdrawing. Left alone with her former friend, Amelia maintained a composed exterior, despite the conflicting emotions roiling beneath the surface, anger, hurt, and an unwelcome thread of lingering affection for the woman who had been her closest companion since childhood. I don't believe we have anything to discuss, Viola, she said quietly. Please, Viola implored, her voice barely above a whisper. Just a few moments. I need to explain. You've already explained, Amelia interrupted. You and Edmund developed an attachment. These things happen, apparently. Viola flinched at the bitterness in Amelia's tone. It wasn't like that. At least not how you imagine. She glanced nervously around the crowded room. Not here. Could we step onto the terrace just for a moment? Amelia hesitated, torn between her desire to maintain distance from Viola and curiosity about what explanation could possibly justify months of deception. Very well, she conceded reluctantly. Briefly. The terrace was mercifully unoccupied, the spring evening just cool enough to discourage most guests from venturing outdoors. Viola led Amelia to a quiet corner, partially screened by potted orange trees. I won't insult you with excuses, Viola began, her composure cracking slightly. What we did, was unforgivable. I betrayed your friendship and your trust. Yes, Amelia agreed simply. You did. Viola's eyes filled with tears. I've spent every moment since that night hating myself for it. But Amelia, there's something you should know. She drew a shaky breath. Edmund isn't who you think he is. He can be cruel, calculating. Amelia frowned. What are you saying, Viola? The night we met, at Lady Westmoreland's ball last autumn, he sought me out deliberately. He knew of our friendship and... Viola hesitated, visibly struggling with her words. He seemed so charming, so attentive. He made me feel special, valued. By the time I realized his true nature, I was already compromised. Compromised, Amelia repeated, a chill running through her at the implication. Viola nodded miserably. He took liberties. Promised marriage if his arrangement with you fell through, then used that indiscretion to ensure my continued cooperation. She looked away, unable to meet Amelia's gaze. When I threatened to confess everything to you, he implied he would ruin my reputation entirely if I spoke a word. The revelation stunned Amelia. She had known Edmund to be ambitious, perhaps even opportunistic, but this level of calculated manipulation suggested a darkness she hadn't glimpsed during their engagement. Why tell me this now, she asked after a moment. Because you deserve to know the truth, Viola replied, and because I fear for you. Edmund is furious about your connection to the Duke. He sees it as a deliberate humiliation, and he's not a man who accepts such blows to his pride gracefully. What do you mean? He's been making inquiries, discreet ones, into the Duke's past, looking for weaknesses, vulnerabilities. I'm afraid he means to cause trouble between you somehow. Amelia processed this information with growing concern. Thank you for the warning, she said finally, though it doesn't change what happened between us, Viola. I know, Viola whispered, wiping away a tear. I don't expect forgiveness. I couldn't bear it if you were hurt further because of my weakness. The sincerity in Viola's voice gave Amelia pause. The betrayal still stung deeply, but perhaps there were complexities to the situation she hadn't fully grasped in the shock of discovery. I need time, Amelia said eventually. What you've told me, it's a lot to absorb. Viola nodded, relief visible in her expression at even this small concession. Of course. Thank you for listening, Amelia. I've missed you terribly. As they re-entered the music room, Amelia caught sight of George searching the crowd, his expression clearing when he located her. He moved purposefully in her direction, offering a cordial but distant nod to Viola as he reached Amelia's side. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice low enough to ensure privacy. "Yes," Amelia replied automatically, then amended. "That is, I'm not entirely sure. Viola has shared some concerning information about Edmund." George's gaze sharpened. "Perhaps we should discuss it somewhere more private. The second half of the performance is about to begin, but we could make our excuses afterward." Amelia nodded gratefully, glad of his understanding without the need for detailed explanation. As they resumed their seats for the recital, she found her thoughts in turmoil, divided between Viola's troubling revelations and acute awareness of George's protective presence beside her. The remainder of the musicale passed in a blur of notes and polite applause. When the final piece concluded, George smoothly made their excuses to Lady Harrington, citing an early engagement the following day. In the relative privacy of his carriage, Amelia related the substance of Viola's confession, watching George's expression grow increasingly grave as she spoke. "Do you believe her?" he asked when she had finished. Amelia considered the question carefully. "I believe she believes herself a victim of manipulation, rather than merely a willing participant in betrayal. Whether that's the complete truth, I cannot say with certainty." "The warning about Fairfax's intentions toward us, or rather, toward me, rings true," George observed. "Men like Fairfax rarely accept defeat gracefully, particularly when their pride is wounded." What could he possibly hope to accomplish, Amelia wondered. "Your position is unassailable compared to his." George's expression turned thoughtful. "Everyone has vulnerabilities, Amelia, even dukes." He glanced out the carriage window at the passing London streets. "There are aspects of my business dealings that, while entirely legal, might appear questionable if presented in a certain light. Investments in the Americas that some might consider speculative, trade arrangements with merchants of ambiguous reputation. Would such revelations damage you significantly? Materially, no. But reputation and trust are the currencies of power in our world. Fairfax cannot touch my title or fortune, but he might attempt to sow doubt about my character." George's gaze returned to Amelia, his expression softening slightly. "However, I'm more concerned about how his machinations might affect you." "Me?" Amelia asked, surprised. "I'm merely a temporary association for you, as we agreed." Something flickered in George's eyes, too quickly for Amelia to interpret, before he composed his features once more. "Nevertheless," he said, "you've become entangled in this situation largely through my intervention. I feel responsible for ensuring you emerge unscathed." The carriage slowed as it approached the Goderic residence. Before it came to a complete stop, George spoke again, his voice carrying a note of decision. "I believe we should accelerate our strategy," he said. "If Fairfax means to cause trouble, we should present him with a fait accompli before he can act." "What do you mean?" Amelia asked, a strange flutter of anticipation rising within her. "An engagement announcement," George replied, watching her carefully for her reaction. "Formal, public, and immediate. It would secure your position socially, and make any attempt by Fairfax to create scandal appear as mere jealousy." Amelia stared at him, momentarily speechless. "But our arrangement was temporary," she finally managed. "A brief association to divert attention from the broken engagement. Nothing more. The announcement need not lead to actual marriage," George clarified. "We could maintain the engagement for a suitable period, then part ways amicably, citing some irreconcilable difference of temperament or preference. By then, the Fairfax scandal would be forgotten, and you would be free to pursue a more suitable match if you wished." It was a logical proposition, presented with the same pragmatic clarity that had characterized their original arrangement. Yet Amelia couldn't help feeling a twinge of disappointment. The notion was absurd. She had entered into this charade with clear understanding of its limitations and purpose. "I see," she said carefully. "And you believe this is necessary?" "I believe it would be prudent," George replied. "But I won't proceed without your full agreement. This decision affects your future significantly, Amelia. I won't have you pressured into it. even by concerns about Fairfax's potential machinations. The carriage had stopped. Outside, the Goderic residence waited, lights glowing warmly in the evening darkness. Amelia knew her parents would be anxiously awaiting her return, eager for details of her public appearance with the Duke. "May I have until tomorrow to consider?" she asked. George nodded immediately. "Of course. I'll call in the afternoon if that's convenient." "Thank you," Amelia said, grateful for his understanding. "For everything, really. You've been remarkably kind through all of this." "Kindness has little to do with it," George replied, though his tone lacked conviction. "Merely a mutual advantage, as we agreed." As he handed her down from the carriage and bid her good night with a formal bow, Amelia couldn't help wondering if that statement was as much a reminder to himself as it was to her. For her own part, she was finding it increasingly difficult to maintain the emotional distance their arrangement supposedly required. In her bedchamber that night, as her lady's maid brushed out her hair, Amelia contemplated the Duke's proposal. A formal engagement would indeed provide protection against whatever scheme Edmund might be contemplating. It would also elevate her standing in society to heights her family had never imagined possible. Yet there was risk as well. The longer their pretense continued, the more difficult extricating herself would become, not merely socially but personally. Already Amelia was conscious of a growing attachment to George Cavendish that extended beyond their pragmatic alliance. His intelligence, his unexpected moments of vulnerability, even his sardonic observations about society, all had begun to form a picture of a man far more complex and compelling than the cold, distant Duke of reputation. "A penny for your thoughts, miss?" her maid ventured, breaking into Amelia's reflections. Amelia smiled faintly at the young woman's reflection in the mirror. "I'm afraid they're worth considerably less than that, Rose. Just the usual feminine preoccupations." Rose's knowing smile suggested she attributed Amelia's distraction to romantic considerations rather than strategic ones. "If you don't mind my saying so, miss, His Grace seems quite taken with you. Mrs. Collins says the whole servants' hall at Ashford House is buzzing with it. The Duke's never shown such interest in any lady before." "Servants' gossip is notoriously unreliable," Amelia replied lightly, though she couldn't help a spark of curiosity. "Mrs. Collins is your cousin in the Duke's household?" "Yes, miss. Second laundry maid. Says the Duke's been different these past days, asking about flower arrangements for the drawing rooms, having the conservatory at Ashford House especially tended." Rose lowered her voice conspiratorially. "And Mrs. Collins says he's ordered a complete refurbishment of the Duchess's suite, untouched since his mother's passing, that was." Amelia's pulse quickened at this information. Such preparations suggested a level of commitment beyond their temporary arrangement, unless, of course, it was merely part of George's thorough approach to their charade. "I'm sure His Grace has many reasons for updating his residences," she said carefully, "none of which necessarily relate to me." Rose looked unconvinced, but knew better than to contradict her mistress directly. "As you say, miss. Will there be anything else this evening?" "No, thank you, Rose. That will be all." Left alone, Amelia moved to the window, gazing out at the night sky barely visible beyond London's glow. Her thoughts remained fixed on the Duke of Ashford, on George, and the curious path that had led them to this juncture. Whatever his true intentions, whatever game Edmund might be playing, Amelia recognized that she stood at a crossroads. The decision she made tomorrow would shape not only her immediate future, but potentially the course of her entire life. For the first time since her disastrous discovery at the Fairfax ball, Amelia found herself contemplating possibilities beyond the narrow confines of duty and expectation. If nothing else, her association with the Duke of Ashford had awakened her to the realization that she deserved more than a marriage of mere convenience, that perhaps, despite the lessons of her upbringing, she might dare to hope for something closer to happiness. With that thought warming her heart against the night's chill, Amelia finally sought her bed, her dreams filled with images of storm-grey eyes and unexpected possibilities. The following afternoon found Amelia in the drawing room once more, awaiting the Duke's arrival with a curious mixture of anticipation and trepidation. She had spent much of the morning in thoughtful consideration of his proposal, weighing practicality against the increasingly complicated emotions that coloured their association. "His Grace, the Duke of Ashford," announced the butler, and Amelia rose to greet George as he entered. Today he wore a coat of deep forest green that complemented his dark hair and emphasized the unusual grey of his eyes. As he bowed over her hand, Amelia noted that his expression carried a gravity beyond its usual reserve. "I trust you're well, Miss Goderic?" he inquired formally, aware of the butler's lingering presence. "Quite well, thank you, Your Grace," she replied. "Would you care to walk in the garden again? The afternoon is particularly fine." George nodded, offering his arm with practiced ease. "I would be delighted." Only when they had reached the relative privacy of the garden bench did his manner relax slightly. "You look troubled, Amelia. Have you been distressed by our discussion last night?" "Not distressed," she corrected gently. "Thoughtful. Your proposal presents both advantages and complications." "I'm eager to hear your assessment of both," George said, his attention focused entirely on her, a quality Amelia had come to appreciate in their conversations. Unlike many men of her acquaintance, the Duke listened as though her opinions genuinely mattered. "The advantages are clear," she began. "A formal engagement would indeed secure my social position and likely neutralize whatever scheme Edmund might be contemplating. It would also," she added with a small smile, "utterly delight my parents, who can scarcely believe their daughter has captured the interest of a duke." George acknowledged this with a slight incline of his head. "And the complications?" Amelia hesitated, searching for words that would convey her concerns without revealing too much of her developing feelings. "The longer we maintain this pretense, the more difficult it becomes to distinguish between performance and reality, at least for me." She looked away, unable to meet his gaze as she made this admission. "I find myself enjoying your company rather more than our arrangement strictly requires." A moment of silence followed her words. When George finally spoke, his voice carried a note Amelia hadn't heard before, a warmth that belied his usual reserve. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "the distinction between pretense and reality is not as clear as we initially believed." Amelia's gaze snapped back to his face, searching for meaning in his measured expression. "What are you saying, George?" He leaned forward slightly, his eyes intent on hers. "I'm saying that what began as a convenient arrangement has become something else, at least for me." He paused, seeming to choose his next words with unusual care. "I find myself thinking of you when we're apart, looking forward to our meetings with an eagerness that has nothing to do with social strategy." Amelia's heart quickened at this unexpected revelation. "You never indicated—" "How could I?" George interrupted gently. "Our agreement was explicitly temporary. I had no right to complicate matters with personal sentiments that you might not welcome." "And now?" Amelia asked, scarcely daring to breathe. "Now I find I cannot in good conscience propose even a pretend engagement without honesty between us." George took her hand, his touch warming her despite the light barrier of her gloves. "The engagement I propose need not be temporary, Amelia, not if you could consider a more permanent arrangement." The words hung in the air between them, momentous and transformative. Amelia studied his face, searching for any sign of insincerity or calculation, finding instead an vulnerability that touched her deeply. "Are you asking me to marry you, George?" "Truly?" "Yes," he replied simply. "Though I recognize the suddenness of this may require time for consideration, I don't expect an immediate—" "Yes," Amelia interrupted, the certainty in her heart outpacing caution. "Yes, I will marry you." For the first time since they'd met, genuine surprise registered on George's features, followed by a smile that transformed his entire countenance. "You're certain? This is not merely acceptance of a convenient solution?" Amelia shook her head, her own smile blossoming in response to his. "In the span of a few days you've shown me more consideration, more genuine interest in my thoughts and feelings than Edmund did in years of our engagement. You've revealed yourself to be a man of principle beneath your ducal reserve. And," she added with newfound boldness, "I find myself thinking of you when we're apart as well." George's smile deepened, reaching his eyes in a way that made Amelia's heart flutter strangely in her chest. "Then it seems we've both been caught in our own charade." Amelia laughed softly. "Perhaps there was less pretense than either of us realized." "There's something else you should know," George said, his expression growing serious once more. "Something I should have told you earlier, perhaps." "What is it?" Amelia asked, a flicker of concern rising at his change in demeanor. My investigation into Fairfax's activities has uncovered some troubling information, he said. It appears he's been systematically manipulating young women of good family, but limited means, women like yourself, for financial gain. Amelia frowned. I don't understand. His pattern is consistent, George explained. He identifies families with useful business connections but precarious finances, courts their daughters with promises of advantageous marriages, then extracts financial concessions from the fathers under the guise of joint ventures before manufacturing reasons to break the engagements. But he didn't break our engagement, Amelia pointed out. I discovered his betrayal and ended it myself. Yes, and that disrupted his usual method, George agreed. Your discovery of his affair with Viola forced his hand before he had fully leveraged your father's East India connections. It's why he's particularly angry about losing you, not from any genuine attachment, but because his scheme was interrupted. A cold realization settled over Amelia. And Viola, was she aware of this pattern? George hesitated. I believe her story contains elements of truth. Fairfax likely did pursue her deliberately, but not merely for pleasure. She was useful to him, a way to maintain appearances, while he continued his scheme with you. How many others? Amelia asked quietly. 3 that I've confirmed, George replied, all within the past 5 years. Each followed the same pattern, a lengthy engagement, business entanglements with the father, then a scandal or conflict that allowed Fairfax to withdraw while keeping whatever financial advantage he had gained. Amelia shook her head, struggling to reconcile this calculating predator with the man she had been prepared to marry. I was such a fool. No, George contradicted firmly. You were trusting, as you had every right to be. The deception is his shame, not yours. Something occurred to Amelia suddenly. Is this why you intervened that night at the ball? Did you already suspect Edmund's true nature? I had suspicions, George admitted. Rumors had reached me about Fairfax's previous engagements, but I had no concrete evidence until I witnessed your discovery of his betrayal. Your distress in the garden moved me, certainly, but I also recognized an opportunity to expose his pattern of behavior. So our arrangement served multiple purposes, Amelia observed, trying to determine how she felt about this revelation. George reached for her hand again, his expression earnest. Initially, yes. But Amelia, you must believe that my growing feelings for you were entirely unexpected and genuine. I entered into our arrangement with strategic intentions, but I remain in it now because I cannot imagine my life without you in it. The sincerity in his voice dispelled any doubts that might have formed. Amelia squeezed his hand gently. I believe you, George, and I'm grateful for your honesty, even if the timing is somewhat belated. A rueful smile touched his lips. I've spent years cultivating emotional distance, learning to trust, to speak openly of feelings. These are skills I'm only beginning to rediscover. Then we shall learn together, Amelia said softly. For I too have spent my life preparing for a marriage of convenience rather than affection. This territory is unfamiliar to us both. George's expression warmed at her understanding. There's one more matter we should discuss before formalizing our engagement, he said. Edmund Fairfax. He's unlikely to accept defeat gracefully, particularly now. What do you propose? Amelia asked. I've gathered evidence of his pattern of deception, George explained. Nothing that would stand in a court of law, perhaps, but enough to destroy his reputation in society if revealed. His dealings, though ethically abhorrent, were executed with enough ambiguity and legal cunning to evade formal prosecution. Scandalous, yes, but not unlawful by the standards of our courts. I intend to meet with him privately, to make it clear that any attempt to interfere with our happiness will result in his complete social and financial ruin. Amelia considered this approach thoughtfully. And Viola? What becomes of her in all this? That, George said gently, is for you to decide. Her role in Fairfax's schemes seems more that of pawn than accomplice, though her betrayal of your friendship remains her own responsibility. The question of Viola weighed heavily on Amelia's heart. The pain of betrayal remained sharp, yet Viola's tearful confession at the musicale had revealed a young woman caught in circumstances partly beyond her control. I'm not ready to forgive her, Amelia admitted, but neither do I wish to see her destroyed alongside Edmund. Perhaps in time we might find some measure of reconciliation. George nodded. A compassionate perspective, and one that speaks to your character. He hesitated briefly before continuing. "There's one final matter I should address before we proceed further." "Yes," Amelia prompted when he paused. "As my Duchess, you would have considerable freedom to pursue your interests, including that desire to travel you mentioned. My business affairs often take me to distant ports. There's no reason you couldn't accompany me." His expression grew intent. "I want you to understand that I don't seek a conventional aristocratic marriage, where the Duchess merely presides over social functions, while the Duke pursues his separate life. I want a true partnership, Amelia, if that's what you desire as well." The word sent a thrill of possibility through Amelia. Not only marriage to a man she was rapidly coming to love, but the freedom to explore the world beyond London's narrow social confines. It was more than she had ever dared hope for. "That's precisely what I desire," she assured him, her voice steady with conviction. "A true partnership built on mutual respect and affection." George's face lit with a smile that transformed his usually serious countenance. "Then I believe we have an understanding." "Indeed we do, Your Grace," Amelia replied, her own smile matching his. "I should speak with your father," George said, rising from the bench and offering his hand to assist her. "And then perhaps make our engagement known at the Pembroke ball this evening." "The perfect occasion," Amelia agreed, accepting his hand and rising to stand beside him. "The entire ton will be present." As they walked back toward the house, George's hand resting lightly at the small of her back, Amelia marveled at the strange turns her life had taken in the span of mere days. What had begun as humiliation and betrayal had somehow transformed into an unexpected chance at genuine happiness. The Pembroke ball was in full swing when the Duke of Ashford's carriage arrived. Amelia sat beside George, her fingers lightly resting on his arm, a delicate diamond engagement ring, his grandmother's, he had explained, gleaming on her left hand. Her father's reaction to the Duke's formal request for her hand had been one of barely contained jubilation, while her mother had promptly burst into tears of joy before launching into immediate plans for what would surely be the social event of the season. George had endured their excitement with good grace, even agreeing to Mrs. Goderic's suggestion of a June wedding at St. George's, Hanover Square, a mere 8 weeks away. "Are you ready?" George asked quietly as the carriage slowed before Pembroke House's illuminated entrance. Amelia nodded, a curious calm having settled over her despite the significance of the evening ahead. "I find I'm not nearly as nervous as I expected to be." "No second thoughts?" he inquired, his tone light but his eyes searching hers with genuine concern. "None," she assured him firmly, "though I admit to some anticipation regarding society's reaction. We've managed to create quite the whirlwind romance." George's smile held a hint of mischief rare for his public demeanor. "Let them talk. I find I rather enjoy providing the ton with something substantive to gossip about for a change." The footman opened the carriage door and George descended first before turning to assist Amelia. As her hand settled in his, he leaned closer. "Remember," he murmured, "no matter what occurs this evening, we face it together." The words warmed Amelia as they ascended the steps to Pembroke House. The butler announced them with particular emphasis. His Grace, the Duke of Ashford, and Miss Amelia Goderic, causing an immediate ripple of attention through the crowded ballroom. Lady Pembroke hastened to greet them, her sharp eyes immediately noting the ring on Amelia's finger. "Your Grace, Miss Goderic, how delightful to see you both. And might I observe that Miss Goderic is wearing a rather significant new adornment this evening?" George inclined his head slightly. "Your observation is correct, Lady Pembroke. Miss Goderic has done me the great honor of accepting my proposal of marriage." Despite having clearly anticipated this announcement, Lady Pembroke managed an impressive display of surprise and delight. "How wonderful! And may I be the first to wish you both every happiness?" "You may indeed," George replied smoothly, "though I suspect congratulations will be abundant this evening." Lady Pembroke's smile widened. "Indeed they shall. You must allow me to share your joyous news with my guests." "By all means," George agreed, his hand settling possessively at Amelia's waist. As their hostess hurried away to spread the announcement, Amelia caught sight of Edmund and Viola across the ballroom. Edmund's expression darkened visibly as he noted their arrival, while Viola merely looked pale and subdued beside him. "Fairfax appears less than pleased by our news," George observed, following her gaze. "I imagine he's realizing that his plans have been thoroughly disrupted." Amelia replied, "both regarding my father's business connections and his attempt to salvage his reputation after our broken engagement." "He'll be even less pleased after our conversation tomorrow," George said quietly. "I've arranged to meet him at my club. Lord Harrington has agreed to be present as a witness, a precaution against any attempt by Fairfax to misrepresent our discussion later." Before Amelia could respond, they were surrounded by well-wishers, Lady Pembroke having wasted no time in announcing their engagement to the assembled guests. For the next hour, Amelia found herself accepting congratulations from what seemed like half of London society, many of whom had scarcely acknowledged her existence before her association with the Duke. "Fascinating how quickly one's social standing can change," she murmured to George during a brief respite between greetings. "A cynical but accurate observation," he agreed, his thumb tracing small circles against her gloved hand. "Though I find myself grateful for the change in my own standing, if not society's assessment of it." "Oh?" Amelia inquired, intrigued by this admission. "Until recently, I was regarded as unapproachable, cold. The solitary Duke, married to his business interests," George elaborated. "Now, thanks to you, I'm seen as a man capable of genuine feeling. It's a rather significant improvement." The warmth in his gaze as he spoke made Amelia's heart flutter pleasantly. "I'm glad to have been of service," she teased gently. "More than you know," he replied, his voice dropping to an intimate tone that sent a delicious shiver through her. Their moment was interrupted by the approach of Lady Harrington, her sharp gaze assessing them with undisguised curiosity. "Well, well," she declared without preamble, "it seems the Duke of Ashford has finally been captured. London's most eligible bachelor, claimed at last." "Not captured, Lady Harrington," George corrected mildly. "Merely fortunate enough to recognize a rare treasure when I encountered one." The older woman's eyebrows rose at this uncharacteristically romantic declaration from a man known for his pragmatism. "Indeed. How very poetic of you, Your Grace." Her gaze shifted to Amelia. "You've accomplished what many considered impossible, my dear. One can only imagine what other miracles you might work as Duchess of Ashford." "I assure you, Lady Harrington, my ambitions extend no further than securing the happiness of my future husband and myself," Amelia replied with careful politeness. "Commendably modest," Lady Harrington observed, though her tone suggested she found such modesty either suspicious or foolish. "Though one should never underestimate the influence a duchess may wield, particularly one married to a man of such extensive interests as the Duke." Before the conversation could continue along this potentially awkward path, a disturbance near the ballroom entrance drew their attention. Edmund Fairfax appeared to be engaged in a heated argument with Lord Pembroke, his voice rising despite their host's obvious attempts to calm him. "It appears your former fiancé has had too much champagne," Lady Harrington observed, with barely concealed delight at the prospect of scandal. "How unfortunate!" George's expression hardened. "If you'll excuse us, Lady Harrington, I believe I should offer Lord Pembroke my assistance." With a protective hand at Amelia's back, he guided her away from the older woman, though not directly toward the disturbance. "Wait here," he murmured, guiding her toward Charlotte Winters, who stood nearby. "Charlotte, might I impose upon you to keep Miss Godrich company for a moment? I need to address a situation." Charlotte, assessing the situation with her usual acuity, nodded immediately. "Of course, Your Grace. Amelia and I have much to discuss regarding wedding preparations, I'm sure." As George strode purposefully toward Edmund and Lord Pembroke, Charlotte linked her arm through Amelia's. "Your former fiancé appears determined to make a spectacle of himself," she observed quietly, "though I must say your current fiancé seems equally determined to prevent it." Amelia watched anxiously as George reached the two men, his calm authority immediately changing the dynamic of the confrontation. Though too distant to hear their words, she could see Edmund's aggressive posture gradually subside in the face of whatever George was saying. "The Duke is rather masterful in such situations, isn't he?" Charlotte remarked with admiration. "So different from Edmund, who always seemed to be performing for an audience." "George is surprising in many ways," Amelia admitted, her gaze still fixed on the scene across the ballroom. Charlotte squeezed her arm gently. "You love him," she stated, rather than asked. "I can see it in your face when you look at him." The observation startled Amelia, though she couldn't deny its accuracy. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who knows you well," Charlotte assured her, and I'm delighted for you, truly. When you first told me of your broken engagement to Edmund, I feared you'd been terribly hurt. Now I see it was the best thing that could have happened. A blessing in disguise, Amelia agreed, watching as George and Lord Pembroke escorted a subdued Edmund from the ballroom, presumably to sober up away from the curious eyes of society. Viola, left standing alone after Edmund's removal, looked lost and uncertain. After a moment's hesitation, she made her way toward Amelia and Charlotte, her steps faltering as she approached. "Amelia," she began hesitantly, "I just wanted to offer my congratulations. The Duke seems... he clearly cares for you deeply." The sincerity in Viola's voice gave Amelia pause. Despite everything, a part of her still mourned the friendship they had once shared. "Thank you, Viola." An awkward silence fell between them. Years of shared confidences and recent betrayal, creating a chasm neither seemed certain how to bridge. Charlotte, sensing the tension, murmured a discreet excuse about refreshments and moved away, leaving the former friends in relative privacy. "I heard about your engagement this morning," Viola continued softly. "Edmund was quite upset." "So I gather," Amelia replied, glancing toward the doorway through which the men had disappeared. "Though his concern seems rather misplaced, given the circumstances of our parting." Viola looked down, her fingers twisting nervously in her skirts. He's not well, Amelia. Since your broken engagement, he's been drinking heavily, making wild accusations. His father is deeply concerned." "I'm sorry to hear that," Amelia said, and found she meant it despite everything. "But his well-being is no longer my responsibility." "No," Viola agreed quickly. "Of course not. She hesitated, then continued in a rush. "I wanted to thank you for not revealing the full extent of what happened. Many in your position would have ensured we were both thoroughly ruined in society." Amelia studied the face that had once been as familiar to her as her own. "Despite everything, Viola, I wouldn't wish such a fate on you, on either of you." Relief flickered across Viola's features. "You're more generous than we deserve." She paused, seeming to gather her courage before adding, "Is there any possibility, do you think, that someday we might, not as before, certainly, but perhaps—" "I don't know," Amelia answered honestly. "The wound is still too fresh to consider what healing might eventually look like." Viola nodded, accepting this assessment without protest. "I understand, but I want you to know that I am truly happy for you, Amelia. The Duke is a fortunate man, and from the way he looks at you, I believe he knows it." Before Amelia could respond, George reappeared at her side, his expression composed, but with a hint of tension around his eyes. "Fairfax has been persuaded to return home," he informed her quietly. "Lord Pembroke's carriage is conveying him as we speak." Viola cursed uncertainly. "If you'll excuse me, Your Grace, Amelia, I should find Lady Fairfax." As she retreated, George turned to Amelia with concern. "Are you all right? I'm sorry you had to witness that scene." "I'm fine," Amelia assured him. "What happened?" George guided her toward a relatively quiet corner of the ballroom. "Fairfax had clearly been drinking before he arrived. When he heard the announcement of our engagement, he became agitated. He was making some rather wild accusations when Lord Pembroke intercepted him." "What sort of accusations?" Amelia asked, a chill of apprehension running through her. "Nothing of consequence," George replied dismissively, though something in his expression suggested otherwise. "The ravings of a man whose pride has been wounded." Amelia laid her hand on his arm. "George, please, no secrets between us, remember?" He sighed, relenting under her steady gaze. "He was claiming that our engagement is a sham, that I'm using you to thwart some business venture he believes I'm aware of. Nonsense, of course, but potentially damaging if repeated in the right circles." "All the more reason for your meeting tomorrow," Amelia observed. "Indeed." George's expression softened as he regarded her. "But let's not allow Fairfax to overshadow our evening. This is a celebration after all." As if on cue, the orchestra began playing a waltz. George extended his hand with a formal bow that was belied by the warmth in his eyes. "May I have this dance, future Duchess of Ashford?" Amelia placed her hand in his, a sense of rightness settling over her as he drew her into his arms. "You may, future husband." As they moved across the floor in perfect synchronization, Amelia marveled at how completely her life had transformed. From the humiliation of betrayal to the joy of unexpected love, from resignation to possibility, all in the span of mere days. "What are you thinking?" George murmured, his face close to hers as the dance brought them together. "That life takes the most unexpected turns," Amelia replied honestly. "A week ago, I believed my future was set in stone, a marriage of convenience to a man who didn't love me. Now, George prompted when she trailed off. Amelia smiled up at him, allowing the happiness she felt to shine in her eyes. "Now I find myself engaged to a man I'm rapidly falling in love with, facing a future filled with possibilities I never dared imagine." The admission, the first time either had spoken directly of love, brought a rare, unguarded smile to George's face. "I find myself in a similar state of astonishment," he confessed. "I came to your rescue that night in the garden with purely practical intentions. I never anticipated that you would rescue me in return." "Rescue you?" Amelia echoed, puzzled. "From solitude," George clarified. "From the fortress I built around myself after Caroline's betrayal. You've accomplished what I believed impossible, Amelia. You've made me trust again, made me hope again." The music swelled around them, but Amelia scarcely heard it, lost in the depths of George's grey eyes and the meaning behind his words. In that moment, surrounded by the glittering elite of London society, yet utterly alone in their private connection, Amelia knew with absolute certainty that their engagement was no longer a matter of convenience or strategy for either of them. It was, quite simply, where they both belonged. The day of the wedding dawned bright and clear, a perfect June morning that seemed designed to match the occasion's joyful spirit. St. George's, Hanover Square, was filled to capacity with the cream of London society, all eager to witness the season's most talked-about union. In a small antechamber, Amelia stood before a mirror as her mother made final adjustments to her veil. The ivory silk of her wedding gown shimmered in the sunlight streaming through the high windows, its elegant simplicity a perfect complement to the magnificent Ashford diamonds adorning her throat and ears, gifts from George the previous evening. "You look beautiful, my darling," Mrs. Godrich said, tears glistening in her eyes. "I could never have imagined such a match for you." "Nor I, Mother," Amelia replied with a smile. "Life has proven rather more surprising than we anticipated." A soft knock at the door heralded her father's arrival. Mr. Godrich entered, resplendent in his finest coat, his expression a mixture of pride and barely contained emotion. "It's time, my dear," he said, offering his arm. "Your Duke awaits." As Amelia took her father's arm, a sense of perfect peace settled over her. The past 2 months had been a whirlwind of preparations and adjustments, yet through it all, her certainty about George had only deepened. Their courtship, though conducted under society's watchful eye, had revealed a man of depth, integrity, and unexpected tenderness. Each day had brought new discoveries: George's dry wit, his genuine interest in her opinions, his thoughtful gestures that spoke more eloquently than words of his growing affection. Edmund Fairfax had departed London shortly after George's private meeting with him, retreating to his family's country estate under the ostensible excuse of overseeing agricultural improvements. Whatever had transpired between the two men remained private, but the result had been Edmund's complete withdrawal from society and business circles alike. Viola, too, had retreated from London, though she had written Amelia a heartfelt letter before departing. In it she had expressed again her remorse and wished Amelia every happiness in her marriage. The letter had concluded with a hope that time might eventually heal the breach between them, a hope that Amelia, from the security of her newfound happiness, found herself increasingly able to share. The organ music swelled as Amelia and her father reached the church doors. The congregation rose, heads turning to witness the bride's entrance. At the altar, George stood tall and commanding in his formal attire, his normally impassive face transformed by an expression of such open adoration that Amelia's breath caught in her throat. As she moved down the aisle toward him, their gazes locked, and in that moment everything else faded away. The watching crowd, the magnificence of the church, the social significance of their union. There was only George, only the love that had blossomed so unexpectedly between them, only the future they would build together. When she reached his side, he took her hand in his touch steady and warm. "You are exquisite," he murmured, his voice for her ears alone. "And you are everything I never knew I wanted," she replied softly. The service proceeded with all the solemnity and splendor befitting a ducal wedding. Amelia spoke her vows in a clear, unwavering voice, her heart full as she promised to love, honor, and cherish the man before her. George's response was equally steady, his grey eyes never leaving hers as he bound himself to her with sacred words. When the Archbishop pronounced them husband and wife, George's kiss was both tender and possessive, a perfect expression of the bond that had formed between them in such a short time. As they turned to face the congregation, now as Duke and Duchess of Ashford, Amelia felt George's hand tighten around hers. "Ready?" he asked quietly. She smiled up at him, her heart overflowing with happiness. "For everything," she replied. Together they proceeded down the aisle, stepping out into the sunlight and the cheering crowd beyond the church doors, stepping out into the future they would share, a future built not on convenience or arrangement, but on the strongest foundation of all, love freely given and joyfully received. Yorkshire, September 1847. The late summer breeze carried the scent of heather across the moors surrounding Ashford Manor, the Duke of Ashford's ancestral country estate. In the private walled garden behind the grand house, Amelia sat on a stone bench, a book open but unread in her lap as she gazed contentedly at the colourful profusion of roses, lavender, and late-blooming delphiniums. 3 months of marriage had brought changes both profound and subtle. The initial adjustments of two independent people learning to share a life had given way to a comfortable rhythm, a sense of partnership that deepened with each passing day. George had proven himself as attentive a husband as he had been a fiancé, taking genuine interest in Amelia's thoughts and preferences, including her in his business discussions when she expressed curiosity, and encouraging her to pursue her own interests with the full support of his position and resources. For her part, Amelia had embraced her role as Duchess of Ashford with natural grace, winning over even the most skeptical members of society with her genuine warmth and intelligence. Where the previous Duchess had been known for opulent but cold formal entertainments, Amelia had established a different tradition, smaller gatherings focused on stimulating conversation, artistic performances, and the fostering of genuine connections. The sound of approaching footsteps drew Amelia from her reverie. She looked up to see George striding across the garden toward her, his formal attire discarded in favor of riding clothes, his usually perfectly arranged hair slightly tousled by the wind. "There you are," he said, his face lighting with pleasure at the sight of her. "I've been looking for you." Amelia smiled, setting aside her book as he joined her on the bench. "Have you enjoyed your ride?" "Immensely," George replied, taking her hand in his. "Though I find I'm increasingly reluctant to be parted from you, even for a few hours." The admission, delivered with characteristic directness, warmed Amelia's heart. Their courtship might have begun as a pragmatic arrangement, but their marriage had blossomed into something neither had anticipated, a deep abiding love that grew stronger with each passing day. "I have news," George continued, his expression a curious mixture of excitement and hesitation. "A letter arrived from Liverpool while I was out. The trading vessel I invested in has returned from the Americas with exceptional profits." "That's wonderful," Amelia said, though she sensed there was more to his announcement. "I'll need to travel to Liverpool next week to oversee the final arrangements," George explained. "I expect to be away for at least a fortnight." "I see," Amelia replied, trying to mask her disappointment at the prospect of their first significant separation since their wedding. George's fingers tightened around hers. "I was hoping," he said carefully, "that you might consider accompanying me." Amelia's head lifted in surprise. "To Liverpool?" "And perhaps beyond," George added, a smile spreading across his features. "The captain speaks highly of Boston. With winter still months away, the crossing would be relatively comfortable. We could return before Christmas, having seen at least a small portion of the wider world you've expressed such interest in exploring." Joy bubbled up within Amelia at this unexpected proposal. "You want to take me to America?" "I want to show you everything," George replied simply. "Every place I've ever traveled, every wonder I've witnessed, and I want to discover new sights alongside you." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle. "What do you say, Duchess? Shall we begin our adventures together?" In that moment, looking into the eyes of the man who had transformed her life in ways she could never have imagined, Amelia felt a profound sense of gratitude for the strange twist of fate that had led her from betrayal to true love. "Yes," she said, leaning forward to press her lips to his in a kiss that spoke of both contentment in their present happiness and anticipation of all that was yet to come. "Let's begin." George drew her closer, deepening the kiss with a passion that still surprised and delighted her. When they finally parted, his expression held a tenderness reserved only for her. "I love you, Amelia Cavendish," he murmured against her lips. "More than I ever believed possible." "And I love you," she replied, her heart full to overflowing. "My unexpected Duke." As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the garden, Duke and Duchess remained hand in hand on the stone bench, discussing plans and possibilities, sharing dreams and desires. Two people who had found in each other not merely an advantageous match, but a true meeting of hearts and minds. From the betrayal of a false fiancé had come the greatest blessing of Amelia's life, a love born of honesty, nurtured by respect, and destined to last a lifetime. The end. Dear listener, if this story found its way to you today, perhaps it wasn't by chance. Life, like Amelia's journey, often surprises us when we least expect it. What seems like heartbreak, a betrayal, a disappointment, a painful ending, can quietly become the beginning of something more truthful, more meaningful. No matter your age, no matter how many chapters have already been written in your life, there is always room for a new one, lighter, wiser, and filled with genuine love. Just as Amelia found her strength after sorrow, you too carry a light within you that cannot be dimmed. Your wisdom, your scars, your hopes, they are all part of your beauty. And even if some days feel heavier than others, never forget, you are worthy of respect, of tenderness, of love that sees you completely. You have not been left behind. You are exactly where you need to be to bloom again. May tonight bring you deep rest and peace of heart. May you feel courage for the days ahead, and may you sleep knowing that you are held, seen, and quietly protected by something greater. With heartfelt gratitude, Legends of the Fall Team. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. If Amelia's journey moved your heart, from betrayal to unexpected love, we invite you to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Your support from the bottom of our hearts motivates us to keep telling stories full of love, redemption, courage, and hope. At the end of this video, another story suggestion from our channel will appear. Click it and let yourself be surprised by more emotional stories just like this one. With love, Legends of the Fall Team.